Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live stream on ZNotes for Teachers. This is our second live stream that we are doing together and bringing real teachers and their experiences to the spotlight to talk about key topics that are challenging educators globally. Today, we have a really interesting topic, one that I'm sure many educators are struggling with. How do we keep students motivated in a time where distractions are at all-time high? Focus and ability to focus of young people is depleting. We have the 7-second TikTok craze going on everywhere. It's getting harder and harder to keep students motivated in classrooms and outside. We're joined today with an amazing group of educators who will share insights both on their subject-specific kind of areas, as well as more general advice, as well as they teach and deliver lessons and teach other teachers how to deliver lessons as well. So to get started, I'm really excited to welcome my amazing panelists. I'll love to hear a little bit about each one of them. I'll start with Madiha, who's our one of our teachers who will be representing literature and languages. Madiha, over to you.
Thank you so much, Zubair. Thank you for having me. Moving forward, I'll just quickly introduce myself. As you already know, my name is Madiha. I have primarily worked as an English language teacher, then moved on to work as head of curriculum at a private school in Pakistan. And my expertise also aligns with teacher training, capacity building, English language teaching to non-native speakers. And currently I'm heading IGCSE section at one of the leading schools in Lahore, which is Lahore Grammar Senior Boys. And other than that, I am generally very passionate about latest trends in education research. And currently, I have been independently trying to read into use of AI, integration of AI into language teaching specifically. So that's about it, I guess. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Madiha. And we're definitely going to be talking about all those topics as we go through the session. Passing to you, Dom.
Hi, Zubair. Good afternoon, everyone. Or good morning, depending on where you are. I have a background in maths and physics. I studied at Bristol in the UK. I also studied in Bordeaux. I was interested in the international experience best part of 20 years ago. I then did Teach First and worked in, I think, what can be called challenging schools in London. Teach First has been hugely successful. And most recently, so I actually really worked 18, 19 years in London, and most recently I've gone international again. So I'm currently in the south of Spain. I'm head of maths here, and yeah, loving it. So look forward to your questions and the webinar.
Fantastic.
Thanks, Zubair.
Thanks, Dom. Over to you, Farheen.
So, hi guys, I'm working as the head of content at ZNotes. I'm also an IB certified sciences facilitator. Previously, I've worked at top IB schools. I've also worked as a service learning coordinator over there. And I've also worked as a curriculum designer in one of the STEM schools in Pakistan. So currently love working at ZNotes.
Thanks, Farheen. And it's wonderful to have that kind of mix of language, sciences, and math in this session as well. And I'm sure there's some cross subject insights, but also subject specific insights that we can capture as well. So just to kind of frame this session, what we really want to do by the end of the hour would be to kind of understand some practical strategies for keeping students motivated, especially when topics get difficult and when we see the lights in their eyes switch off, as they say. We want to understand the different motivational challenges students face in these specific subjects. Learn how to balance that prep time versus in-class time. I know that it's always a challenge. Like sometimes you over-prepare and you realize that the classroom environment is completely different. And of course, we'd love to share how ZNotes is already supporting tens of thousands of teachers and how it could also be used in your classroom and support as well. To get a kind of sense of what the listeners are feeling today, I want to start with a quick poll, and I'm going to ask each one of you as well. But those of you who are with us live, I can see a couple of you. Thanks so much for joining, and also use the chat functionality to respond to this. When students lose motivation, what do you notice first? So is it silence? Is it some off-task behavior that you see? Is it lack of participation? Or is it the overwhelming giving up sense that they're giving off? So if you're listening live, you can just send it as a message on YouTube or LinkedIn Live, and we'll be able to pick that up as well. as we get some input from our listeners, I'll pass to you, Dom. What do you see first? Because I know math is sometimes considered that daunting, challenging subject. What happens when students do motivation?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I think we've all observed off-task behaviour. I tend to think that or distraction, that's more sort of whether you think you can do it, which is slightly different from engagement and motivation. I think it's that lack of participation for
Okay.
me. It's that opting out.
Interesting. Yeah. What about you, Madiha?
As a language teacher, I would go for the overwhelming and giving up part because, generally speaking, if it's a literature assessment or an assignment, it might require a lot of analysis and reading into other texts to have a comparative perspective on the assignment. Or at times, it's a creative writing task. So, generally, what I have seen that my students would generally just give up by saying that I'm having a writer's block, I need more time, or they might just say that I took literature thinking that it might be an easier option, but now that you are setting expectations for the course, especially in IGCSE and A levels, they tend to feel overwhelmed. And then one more thing that I notice is that they are usually striving for easy A and A stars, and unfortunately they assume that literature is going to be an easy A. But just
Yeah.
because you're fluent in a language, that does not mean that the curriculum part is going to be equally easy. So definitely feeling overwhelmed and giving up.
Thank you, Madiha. I'll pass to you as well, Farheen, because and I know that when you were teaching, you were looking at some of the younger students. So what was something that was maybe different in that case?
So yeah, it was pretty similar for me as well, considering that I was teaching teens, and in sciences you need strong engagement and a sense of conceptual understanding to be going around in the classroom. Otherwise, they just get very easily distracted, and these are teens with very high energy levels, right? So for me,
Yeah.
I've always noticed that when they disengage, it's usually distraction or off-task behavior because they need to let out that energy elsewhere. If not in productive
Yeah.
engagement, then it's off-task behavior.
Interesting. We have a respondent from one of our live listeners as well. Javier says that it's lack of participation, so similar to what you shared as well, Dom. So I think it varies depending on the subject as well as the age group to some extent about the energy levels in the classroom as well. So I'm gonna hide these slides so that we get to see your beautiful faces and get into the discussion more deeply. Before we talk about strategies on how to resolve the distractions and challenges, I want to start with maybe like recalling instances of distraction or lack of motivation among your students. I'll start with you, Madiha. Can you recall a time when a student just completely shut down with a text or a writing task? How did you recognize and what was your immediate response in that moment?
Okay, so honestly, as a language teacher, I think it happens almost in every other lesson
Wow.
because the writing part, especially, it's a natural thing for humans to at times be a little distracted or being even in an overwhelming situation where you're unable to create something because it's something that really has to, come from the heart. So for me, generally, the first way of picking that a student is, struggling or perhaps is not really there, you can always tell, obviously, from the frustration they have towards the assignment, how they start whining and complaining that the topic itself is something that's not engaging enough. And perhaps it would have been a different starter or a different setting. They would have done a better job at writing a narrative. So in that case, I always make sure that I have a variety of stimuli available for the students to pick and choose from and write on something that's more meaningful. And then at times, if an assignment especially requires a lot of critical analysis in literature part, I always break down the assignment for them. So I let them, work in a graded manner where perhaps we are just working on the introductory bit in the one lesson, and then I give them feedback on that. They polish it. We move on to the other part, the middle part later, and finally the conclusion. So instead of just setting the stakes high for them and putting them in a lot
Mm.
of pressure, I do feel that taking off the pressure, making it more digestible for them, and then catering to differentiated learning styles, that kind of always works for me, at least in my language and literature classrooms.
Very interesting. I'm also really, curious about the stimuli as well, and I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit more, because sometimes we forget that even a small physical apparatus in a classroom can be completely transformative of how a student engages. Now, Dom, I'm a math graduate, as you know, and I absolutely love math, but I also know that math anxiety is real, and many students just switch off before they even enter the classroom. And I'm sure inner London schools, or even today where you are, these are challenges that you face. Can you talk about moments where large proportions of your classroom was facing this level of anxiety, maybe not being taught math well before, and how were you able to tackle such a situation?
It's a great question. I love that word pressure. I think you do have to find a way to take the pressure off whilst also keeping a wider focus on the long-term goals of the group. I'll be honest, I can recall a moment yesterday. Fabulous kids here at Sage College, very bright. I was teaching the quadratic formula, and if you've ever worked with a calculator, you think it's your friend. And I thought I modeled it beautifully, many whiteboards, drop the number in. And now, of course, if you drop a negative in the wrong place without a bracket, if perhaps you haven't got your C value right and you get a negative in the discriminant, something happens and the student actually gets something on the calculator. And we've all seen it. It says math error. And, what is designed to be easy suddenly is like literally you've told them that, the calculator is not only creating a feedback loop of a problem. So, that moment happened to me just yesterday. I'm not saying every student in the class had that, but you have to be able to think when you're teaching maths or anything, be flexible and be adaptable and think, okay, right, where do I need to reevaluate here? Where do I need to go back? Where could I have scaffolded more? Now, in those moments, you can lose a student, but I think you need to find something that the student can do and then praise them and then celebrate that success. So, perhaps the student just needs to take the quadratic formula as an example, identify A, B, and C, or perhaps can you work out the denominator? It's going to be 2 times A. Just do that. I'll come back to you in a minute. Great, you've done that. Do it for those 5 questions. Celebrate that. Move on. You kind of change the energy of we have to get everything right to making progress. Yeah,
definitely. The multi-steps especially get super complicated, and lack of affirmation to some extent is also quite demotivating, especially for students who may have. Math is one of those things that has such a long kind of development cycle as well. You need to have got great primary teachers to great early school or early secondary teachers, and then when you get to GCSEs and A levels, it's all building up. So really helpful there, Dom. I'll continue on this kind of this discipline exploration. So I'm going to go to sciences and over to you, Farheen. There are some pretty hard topics that we need to get teenagers to understand, whether that's diffusion or osmosis, and the fact that they're slightly counterintuitive, but they also kind of make sense. What are moments where you've kind of seen students get disengaged, their eyes glazing over? How do you manage those situations?
So again, I think like most of the educators, I've also faced that pretty frequently. And I remember this one time I was teaching chemical bonding to my MYP year 4 class. And as you know, that's a bit of a tricky topic. And I could see a few of the students just giving up. There's a word that Madiha used, frustration. So you can actually see the silent frustration when they're not getting something. And you can see it written on their face. I don't get it, and I'm done trying. So the thing about sciences is, especially in IB, you can very easily connect it to real life contexts, and that just gets a debate going. And in sciences, I think the best way to spark curiosity is debates. So I just give them a real life example. Let's say you wanted to make a phone case. Which bonds would you prefer having in that? And that just sparked a debate. Which one would be harder? Which one would be stronger? Which one would be flexible? So science is kind of like a tool for innovation rather than just a list of concepts. So that's how I bring my students back into the classroom and get them back interested into a topic that they've almost given up on.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Now, I don't want it to this to be like a kind of a negative session for the whole part. I really want to hear the celebration and moments where you've gone into a classroom and the energy is high, the motivation is there, students are bubbling with energy, sharing and learning from each other. So talk to us some moments, maybe Madiha, again, back to you. You're teaching a lesson, you're maybe literature or language, and you see this kind of really positive energy. Was it because of you? Was it an external factor? And how did you kind of keep that energy going?
I think, Zubair, for me, again, I would say that when you set up your students to succeed, and you read the room at least in the initial lessons in a way that you know that what are the individual smaller struggles each learner is going through, and you start planning in a way that they start experiencing success, that leads to a lot of confidence. And that confidence itself brings a lot of delight, like you said, that aha moment when the eyes light up, or that eureka moment when they are finally getting an A on an assignment they have been struggling on. So I would say that creating the room for success, being someone who is a hard taskmaster, but at the same time who is cognizant of the fact that you have to create room for success. You have to celebrate small wins. And even when you're giving feedback, like I said, you have to put that eye to detail that wherever they have improved, they should feel that you have noticed that. So letting them feel seen and setting them up for success is something I feel that always brings that positive energy to the classroom. You know, excitement to be there comes from your feeling that you can do it.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I'd love to hear a story, maybe back from Inner London, Dong, that you may recall and you fondly remember back.
Oh, you put me on the spot there to think of a specific entertaining anecdote. I'm not sure I can do that, although one might come to mind. I do think that, I think as educators, we have to, look, you alluded to it there. I think you said it, Zubair, about external factors. And I think sometimes as teachers, it's such a demanding job, like for everyone, wherever we are in the world, whether we have, what previously high achieving students or students with special educational needs, it's demanding. And I've worked with so many people that just don't give themselves the credit for the fabulous work that they do. So what I'm going to say here is I do think it's worth reflecting, just as you might have, for example, a fire alarm, and then the next lesson's a disaster, and you think there's an external factor. I do think it's worth reflecting as teachers. Actually, when things go really well, you do have to sort of let it go, and you have to know when to step back. But actually really reflecting and thinking, what did you as the leader of that group of young people, if we're talking, or older people in many cases for internet, working with older learners, like what did you do that created that? And actually give yourself the time to reflect on that, and then possibly come up with some specific things that you believe you did, and then give yourself the credit for it. And don't shy away from thinking that there are external factors that create positivity. Sometimes it is your brilliant work. Now, I'm not going to give anecdotes of my brilliant work. I'm sure there've been odd moments. That wasn't the answer I was going to sort of construct, but I'll leave you with that just to ponder.
Yeah, no, it's an incredibly demanding job, and you are responsible for both the kind of academic, but also the emotional well-being of 30, 35, students at a given time. And the role of a teacher is, as I've kind of increasingly realized, is so much more than just being the sage on the stage. And I'm not saying sage because that's where you're teaching, Dom, but there's so much more to it. And I think it's really important that teachers also celebrate that and recognize that as well. Farheen, I'll come over to you as well. Let's hear some positive stories about educational and classroom experiences.
So for me personally, I've always felt that the most vibrant and fun classrooms are the ones that are always buzzing and maybe borderline chaotic. I don't appreciate classrooms that just have dead silence. That's not a classroom. So it's nice to always see intellectual curiosity in motion as well. There are hands shooting up, and not just to answer the questions that I'm putting forward, but to argue, to test different theories. So like, for example, there was this one moment, and this was back when my students were very young. They were in grade 7. And we were sort of discussing about different senses. And I put forward a question that, all right, okay, maybe let's think about different sense-enhancing technologies and how these technologies have shaped the world that we're living in, and how they could have a good or a bad influence on whatever we're doing or the world as we live in it. So in science, I believe the crazier the idea, the more fun it is to have a conversation about it. So the little success stories are always the crazy ideas that they're putting forward, that, oh, this is something really crazy, but it sounds interesting. Can we have a conversation about this? So it's always about giving them that confidence of coming forward with their crazy ideas.
I like that, and I do agree that I don't know about borderline chaotic, but I do like the idea of high energy, lots of enthusiasm, and not just conversations and answering questions, but also, feeling comfortable enough to be able to ask you questions, or maybe even question what you're saying, in a healthy, in a constructive way. So I want to get into a couple of like maybe scenario-based questions. For those of you listening in live, I do want to kind of reiterate that this will be as interactive as possible. So we'll definitely have space and time for you to ask some questions as well. So if you do have questions as we're talking, drop them in the chat and we'll bring them in. But I'm going to go towards some scenarios, and we've already touched upon a couple of them. I want to talk to first again back to you, Madiha. We kind of mentioned stimuli. I want to go into a little bit more depth there. Writing is a very difficult task, and analyzing, especially when it's multimodal and multi-text related, is quite tough. What are some specific techniques you've used to turn a very solo writing or creative activity into something that's more collaborative, that creates energy, and that results in a more positive learning outcome?
Okay, so really interesting question, and I'm impressed that you picked on that word stimuli and you have gotten back to it.
Yes, of
So in
course.
writing classrooms, I might give a verbal, like a written or a verbal starter to one student. I might allow another one to pick up their favorite song, focus on the lyrics, and come up with a story that might be in the background of someone writing that song, and the story
Mm,
ending at person writing that song.
mm,
Or if someone enjoys pictures, I might pick up, a more complex picture, because usually I'm dealing with IGCSE and A-level students, so they have to be exam ready as well. So I
mm,
might pick pick a more complex kind of a picture, maybe from Van Gogh or a similar artist, and let them, then describe the setting in which someone might be, painting that picture. So I
mm.
think that kind of gives them a lot of imaginative playroom. That gives them a lot of play feel in terms of experimenting with different perspectives, putting yourself in the other person's shoes as well. Indirectly, that also builds a lot of critical thinking, curiosity, and empathy at the same time. And then, if we talk about some subject specific strategies, I would say that. Sometimes I just let them peer teach. So maybe you have written a
Mm,
draft, your peer has written a draft, you exchange them. I give them the criteria on which and how we are going to assess it, and they write
mm,
critique for one another. And again, they can
mm.
agree or disagree with it and come up with another draft if they want to incorporate the critique that has been given by their peer. Or at times, what I do is I divide them into groups. So one group might be writing beginning of the story, the other might be writing the middle of the story without knowing what the beginning would be, and the third
Okay.
group might be writing ending to the same prompt that I have given. And then I let them put those together on the whiteboard with a masking tape, and now they get to pick and choose that which middle part fits with which starting, and which ending can fit with which story. So they mix
Yeah.
and match like a jigsaw and come up with narratives that might not be as we are expecting, but come up with
Yeah.
some very interesting cliffhangers and plot twists.
I love these, and there's just such fun activities. I wish I was back in your literature class as well. I want to follow up a little bit, and there are two things that I want to kind of ask you about. Number one is that literature has a very deeply meta-analytical thinking required, which is very difficult to inculcate in young minds. It's not thinking about what the writer is writing, but what the writer is feeling when he's writing, or what the writer is in context, or what writer is. There's so many levels to it. How do you bring students beyond the surface level? And when you're talking about playful activities, we always had a teacher who would always be putting a movie on, and we'd always say it's the best class, but it was really kind of not really outcome driven. How do you manage play and interactivity? But also, yes, the students are motivated, but maybe the progress towards syllabus and outcomes are not being achieved. So the balance between interactivity, motivation, but also ensuring that, at the end of the day, the syllabus needs to be achieved.
Okay, I'm sorry, there's azan going on in the background. I'll just wait for like
That's
two
okay.
more seconds for it to end and I'll get back.
That's right. Then maybe I'll switch to Dom and I'll come back. And thanks, Madiha. Dom, again, I'm back in my math class. I had some incredible teachers along the way. I want to come back to the challenge of this kind of lack of foundations oftentimes in mathematical education, and then coming to you at GCSE or A-level point and asking to kind of get to a C or a B, or whatever that requirement is. Differentiated learning is probably the hardest thing to do in a math class, but how have you been able to manage it when their abilities are pretty mixed and you want to make sure the high achiever is also being supported as much as the least able student?
Yeah, such a good question. I think the research on this is really clear, actually, and we all have, we all sit on different points of spectrum when we think about whether we're progressive educators or sort of, dinosaurs of yesteryear. And I do think the research is clear. I don't know if it's clear for every subject, but the direct explicit instruction and making sure everyone is included with clear sort of quality pedagogy from the ground up is the way to deliver learning. And that explicit instruction is not only beneficial to those that kind of like need the extra support, but that everyone benefits along the journey. Now, it's kind of simple for me to sit here and pontificate a little bit about educational research. But I do think that's of huge value in the maths classroom. I think back to Ofsted 20 years ago and trying to create different kind of routes through a lesson because I had to differentiate and tick a box in England for an Ofsted inspector. That's very challenging. You can only divide your energy and yourself so many ways.
Yeah.
A really well thought through explanation, methodology. I mean, we can use different words to talk about the same thing. A well-designed task that enables everyone to join in. It also ensures that you can use the peer group to support each other because ultimately they're doing the same content, and I do mean as close to the same content as possible. Then one student can support another. Now, if you kind of split into different kind of zones, that's not possible. It's not to say I'm not someone that kind of it goes to extremes. I don't think that there's never a time to break off into different groups and do something different in different subjects or based on what you've covered. There's a time for everything. I don't like these kind of extremities of you need to do this. But I do think the way to, there's two things really. What I said is clear methodology, but also it's so important in maths to think, actually, how do you demonstrate what you want the students to do? There's perhaps 4 or 5 different methods to solve an equation. But I do believe that there is one best method, and it now might not be the time to go specifically into why balancing things is correct, in my opinion. But actually, as you progress with mathematics and move towards higher level, you realize you can't sort of just move things from one side of an equation to another. You do have to balance with an inverse. Yeah. So therefore, it's important when you're 9 years old and you start doing that for it to be done correctly, because it does have an impact when you're 16 or 20.
Absolutely, absolutely. And talking about that explicit instruction again, how do you? And I'd love to kind of. I know I'm going very detail oriented, but I'd love to hear like a breakdown of a typical class that you deliver, especially because students may be glazing off at some points of that explicit instruction or methodology. Where do you find like the right balance between instruction, explanation, tasks, and then kind of reflection?
Yeah, another great question. I've kind of gone off piste, but I like it.
Thanks.
One of the great strengths of Ofsted recently in England, and there haven't been many over the years, but we've really embedded knowledge retrieval in the UK system as a kind of best point of practice. Personally, at Sage College right now, I'm finding that kind of tricky because lessons are shorter, they're punctual, the students can get through it in the time. But I've become accustomed to kind of quite lengthy knowledge retrievals, and I realised perhaps I need to slim it down. But I do think that basis for saying essentially it's a low stakes, and I think Madiha, you said it right at the start, a way of reducing the pressure. I try and get my kids to do that in silence wherever possible. Now there might be times where I've chosen the questions wrong, but essentially every day I'm creating a mini test which builds their memory. I do think that's important to say. And that's the basis for the start of every lesson. After that, great question. Where do you move forward? Again, I do think there are times where you have to, like perhaps if you've got kids that are capable, can they discover how to create the quadratic formula by completing the square? That might be appropriate. For another group, it might not. The one thing I did want to say about balance was I do think we've all stood in front of a group of students and noticed, okay, I've lost that student. Something's gone there. I've switched them off, or perhaps there's something else going on in their life that is nothing to do with me, but then they're not on it. And you have to register that. But I do think you have to move with the majority, don't you? You have to do that as quickly and as punchy as possible. you as a human being make a note that you need to go and see that person. It might be nothing to do with your lesson. But as a human being, you go, you check in, where students perhaps aren't with the direct instruction. Nobody gets it right 100% of the time. But again, I do think you set that clear modeling for the majority, and then you move forward. It's worth saying you don't talk for too long, a bit like I did now. You have to kind of know when to just snip it off and say, okay, let's practice it. Let's find something similar. How does this apply here? Read the room.
Absolutely. Very, very interesting. And not to over-index on a specific, let's say a deviant in the classroom at the time. And it could be for various factors. And I think some early educators always fall in the trap of trying to make the whole class happy. And I think it's just sometimes humanly not possible because the factors associated are not always related to the class or you itself. I want to come back to peer learning, back to you in a little bit, Dom, because I think that's a topic that I'm really interested in at ZNotes, and also the way that you talked about in terms of students teaching back to each other. But I want to come back to Madiha. I think that might have finished by now, and go to those specifics again around the meta skills development among younger students, and then finally like balancing play with the fact that you still need to get through a syllabus.
Okay, all right. Great question, definitely. So I'll address them as two branches. The first branch of the question was about developing that critical thinking that's needed for a good literary analysis as a literature teacher. So for that, one thing that I have seen working really well, not only in my classrooms, but generally if you exchange notes with literature teachers in Pakistan, most of the texts that students are exposed to are very westernized. So at times contextualizing those texts within our own setting, and even just changing the names with the local names or changing the setting with the local name engages student really well. If they are familiar with the names and the setting, and you're picking texts that are easily contextualizable in your settings, in the situations that are more current to people living in your part of the world, that helps. Then we Pakistanis love onions, we make salad out of them, we put them in our curries. So even when I'm teaching literary analysis, I would always say that take it like you're dealing with an onion. So there's an outer layer where you're only looking at the literal meaning of things. Then there is an inner layer where you're moving forward to the connotations, whether the tone is positive or negative, biased, or is it, aggressive. Then there's another layer if you have gotten to that part of the onion, where you're now looking at the emotions that are involved with a certain word in the text or a certain character, what they are going through. And then the innermost part would be that what kind of evolvement, what kind of character development, what kind of change that character is feeling, or how that text is heading towards, the plausible ending. So I believe that, using your real life desi references at times has even helped me to teach something, as Scottish as Macbeth, or something, as Venetian as Romeo and Juliet. So that always works. And then the next question was that how to build skill and how to find room for both play and then making sure that they're exam ready. We are lucky in a way that for IGCSE, my students I know would be taking their final language exam somewhere in, 2 years down the road. So generally, when they are just entering IGCSE in nines, I do create room for more play because that is where I want them to develop that love for learning. And by the time they transition into grade 10, now where I know that at the end of the day they would be taking their IGCSE exam, that is where we start focusing more on examiner reports and marking schemes and rubrics, and start providing more Cambridge aligned feedback on whatever work they are turning in. So it's more about developing fondness for the subject first, and then training them rigorously regarding the fact how they can get an A and A star. And alhamdulillah, things have been good so far. We have produced really good amount of A stars and even distinctions every year, despite being the country that does not speak English as its first language.
That's incredible, and it's really interesting how you balance both. The contextualization is super interesting. To be honest, I didn't, as a literature student, never got that that instruction from my teacher. But I can definitely see, like, if I could associate to someone who's maybe someone I've witnessed or been in my life, closer to then that abstract character, might have been able to kind of understand that context a bit more. Now, Farheen, you have a very different discipline. Now, Madiha has obviously a bit more creativity and abstraction there. Dom is doing math, which is really difficult to sometimes, comprehend. With your work at Sciences, you have oftentimes a physical, experimental component to it as well. Talk us through some of the kind of experiences that you had where, like, inquiry-based or hands-on strategies helped deliver that concept more deeply than, let's say, going through a very, very kind of theoretical lecture.
Right. So honestly, in IB, it's all about turning teacher-led experiments into student-driven inquiries. So we
Mm,
treat them as AI, and we're the ones feeding the prompts.
mm,
Everything, the knowledge or the answers, that needs to be coming from the students rather than
mm,
us. So it's the other way around, right?
mm,
Um, and since in IB, uh, a lot of interdisciplinary teaching is encouraged. So
mhm,
we tend to make more connections across different disciplines. So when I feel that maybe the concept has gotten too abstract, I
mhm,
incorporate design into it. I turn it
mhm,
into a design challenge. So if I were teaching something like the DNA, instead of just showing them the double helix structure that we've all seen ever since we were kids, I would turn it into a problem. I would pose a problem. Let's say you were ancient scientists and you have to teach this to someone else, but you don't have the current infrastructure or equipment that we have right now. So they would instantly turn it into a design challenge, and they would maybe start coming up with strings and beads structures, or they would
mm,
turn it even into origami. So it's all about, like you and Madiha were also discussing, about having that balance of play within your classrooms as well, so that abstract concepts or too complex concepts, they can be taken in a much more fun way, where learning is fun instead of just something that they're obligated to do.
mm. That's very interesting. And to kind of go into a specific example, like some of the, especially in physics, I mean, Dom, you're also a physics teacher. We get into pretty complex areas of maybe phenomena that we don't really see in real life. How do you balance? How do you bring that into a maybe a mixed abilities class where not everyone is at the same level of mathematics or foundational experiences that will lead them to understand that concept? I'm thinking back to electromagnetism in A-level physics, and I remember glazing over and having to kind of do a lot before I could even like get into that intuitiveness of the, I don't even know anymore, Dom. Like, is it some sort of thumb rule or something like that? But yeah, so what do you do at that moment?
Right hand thumb.
Right hand thumb rule.
So, so when I think about differentiation within the classrooms, it's not about simplifying content, because there's a limit to how much you can simplify content in terms of scientific concepts. It's about diversifying entry points, right? So I
Interesting.
need to
Okay.
understand where the entry points are for my students to enter into that concept and get motivated or engaged with that concept. So,
Mhm.
like you said, physics, if I'm teaching energy transfer and we're having a discussion about the best insulator, maybe I'll create different entry points. I'll create different layers. One group is studying about, let's say, the qualitative observations. The other group is talking about energy loss. Then there's another group that's kind of talking about the or making models that represent efficiency. So it's about diversifying the entry points.
Mm. That's very interesting. And in some ways, each one of them learns something from a different, like as you said, entry point. So they're looking at that problem from a different angle and can each help facilitate making that understanding broadly more available to the whole class. So just taking that as a launch pad to my more cross panel discussion, not just to the specific subject, but more across for all of you. At ZNotes, we've seen so much value in the interaction of learning from and with each other among students. They are able to share more relatable insights. They're able to study together. They're able to explain concepts that may not have immediately been understood in a classroom. It seems, Farheen, that in a lesson that you're teaching energy transfer, you may have three groups of understood energy transfer from very different angles. What role does peer learning play, and how do you facilitate that in a way, again, that is effective in terms of learning outcomes, but also is motivating, so it's not a boring exercise either?
Right. So again, it all circles back to the principles of IB. In IB, collaboration is one of the key concepts or the key skills that we focus on developing within our learners. So again, that's something that needs to be very majorly focused on during our classrooms. If I am making groups, even while I am organizing them into groups, that they need to be of mixed abilities. I can't have all of the extra enthusiastic learners in one group and the ones that might be on the verge of losing motivation or on the verge of disengagement into one group. So that kind of mixed ability grouping keeps them going.
Okay, interesting. Usually that's that when we're talking about differentiation, sometimes we do the kind of the thing where we put all the smart kids together and all the less able students together, and then we create this wider disengagement and divide oftentimes and exacerbate the learning abilities as well. Very interesting about those mixed abilities. Madiha, I would love to ask you as well, because you talked about this before. Again, what does collaboration mean in a language or literature class?
Okay, all right. So, Zubair, coming back, I do feel that just like you pointed out, differentiation cannot always look like having mixed ability groups. At times, it is actually putting all the smart ones in one group and let them have that, intellectual war going on between them and figuring out more complex things or maybe more complex questions of literature. And then having maybe someone who needs more support all in one group and navigating their work, spotting their work more effectively. And then differentiation can also come in the form of the written work expected day, but I might allow someone I know struggles to turn it something that is perhaps of 300 words. And even in terms of the criteria that I set for marking at times, I might change it for a high achiever group, or for high achievers, I might differentiate it into something that has more higher expectations, harder to get an A on. And sometimes just to create that room for experiencing success, I might actually for my struggling students. And I do have room for that as long as they are in, the first year of IGCSE with me. Yes, once they get to grade 10 or, the second year of IGCSE, I do understand and I do feel that differentiation becomes more and more difficult because you have to get all of them ready for the single exam that they would be taking. So for classes where students have to be exam ready, sometimes differentiation, even if you want to include it, I do feel it does become challenging assessment. So the fish would be expected to climb a tree, and I have to find a way around it.
Very interesting, and I appreciate the kind of the importance of considering it, and also giving that, I think we started right at the beginning, in that some sort of an affirmation or reward system that allows students to stay engaged. Dom, I want to come to you. Math always has some component of someone come kind of helping and explaining slightly harder topics to each other. Have you seen that happen, and how has it been done effectively when it comes to a classrooming environment?
Super question. Whenever I talk about this, I think back to my very earliest days teaching, and I was super lucky to work with a guy who's in school called, he's in North London, what's it called? Totteridge Academy, I think. Mr.
Okay.
Gideropoulos, Mr. G. He is one of the most fantastic teachers. I was very lucky to have him as my mentor. He's a couple of years older than me.
Okay.
And one of the things he just did so fabulously well was, and we talked a bit earlier about reducing pressure. He had this unbelievable way to encourage the students to, let's say you've got a task and you've got a problem, work in a group, 3 minutes, solve the problem. Everyone is responsible for everyone else. If one person can explain this, then everyone can explain it. Now he had a real kind of knack for how he did that, and I've tried to do it. I've done it billions of times over the years. I don't think I've ever quite done it as well as him. But sometimes putting that pressure back on the students to say, well, actually, you can be responsible, because we don't want to become sort of woolly and fluffy with our idea that peers can support each other. Students can support each other, and we can differentiate. We differentiate in a myriad of different ways. We need to kind of be. What did you say earlier? One of you said taskmaster. I think we do need to be a taskmaster when it comes to this. It's like we know how brilliant they can be working with each other, but then we need to be really clear about exactly what it is they need to do when we come back to the whole class setting. Otherwise, some do and some just do not. And of course, we perhaps exacerbated the problem. So that's when I've seen it done at its absolute best. And thank you, Mr. G, if you're ever watching.
Incredible. Maybe I want to bring it one step further. What at the moment when you get the students that they've done that problem, is there a component of teaching back that you encourage, and what happens when a student teaches that concept to its peers?
Yeah, I think the teach back element is crucial, isn't it? It's not only the group teach back, it's the knowing when as an educator you can ask someone to teach that back to the class, or perhaps groups can swap. Yeah, I do think that quality of their explanation, I think it's important. I wanted to say this earlier and I went off kind of task, but just how the culture of our rooms, our classrooms, sets everything we do, right? So sort of underpinning everything Madiha, Farheen and myself and all the great teachers of the world, there's something that underpins everything, and it's that kind of inclusive. Everyone's going to succeed. Everyone can and will in slightly different ways. And we're supportive of each other, and we find small wins and quick wins. So that kind of cultural thing, which is a social thing, teaching is ultimately, whether as a school or an online school or within the group, it's a social, it's a social demand on us to be successful together.
Tom, I'm not going to let you go. I have one follow up to this, because I think it's something that I'd love to kind of close our discussion and open up to audience Q&A as well. How do you create a culture of inclusivity and curiosity in a classroom?
I encourage mistakes. Like, you don't want everyone to get everything wrong, but nobody knows everything at the start. You have to know it at the end. And I will say to students, we love telling stories. Madiha said that, using the language of your local area rather than using kind of westernized language. It's completely appropriate, though. That hinterland knowledge is so crucial, isn't it? But being in England, Isaac Newton is someone who is as famous and as fabulous as he is, but he only really spent 2 years to discover calculus because of the Great Plague. Cambridge University was closed, and he was 2 years alone in Lincolnshire, COVID-type times, and he pondered gradient. No, he didn't ponder gradient. Leibniz pondered gradient. He pondered area, and he thought about area for 2 years. And then 30 years later, he decided he cracked it and would publish it. Yeah. So it's only, it's only at the end we ever really know. And during the process, if any student ever makes a mistake, I say that's brilliant, because in 5 minutes when you're able to do it, you've learned something.
Yeah, very interesting. I'll go around the room for that final question. So Farheen, how did you create a culture of inclusivity, curiosity, and success?
So for me, in sciences, it is exactly as Dom stated before. It's about creating that safety or that room to be wrong. Because of course, in sciences, you're not always going to get the right answer, especially when you're conducting experiments, you're going through the scientific investigation, you will repeatedly get answers wrong. And that is where the students feel like, okay, maybe I haven't gotten this down, maybe I'm not doing this right. But that's something that I need to instill as a facilitator within my students, that being wrong is still also teaching you something. You can redo the experiment and then maybe get a better answer out of it. Maybe use this as a benchmark and then build on top of this. So it's always about creating that safety and that confidence within my students that it's okay to be wrong. They don't have to have the right answers every single time.
Very interesting. It's so easy to say that we encourage failure, but it's so hard to put it into practice and really create a culture around it. But it seems like both of you were able to do so. I do want to flag to some of our live listeners, if you have any questions for Dom, Madiha, or Farheen, please do send them in the chat so we can also bring it into discussion. Over to you, Madiha. How did you create a kind of this culture, and what sort of strategies did you use to implement it?
To make the classroom more inclusive, right?
Yes.
Again, because being in a community where basically the privileged of the city are coming to a certain grammar school, we do not get much differentiated backgrounds sitting together. I really hope that we, have the opportunities where we can bring in kids coming from different backgrounds together, because I think that develops a lot of tolerance and a lot of social courtesy towards people who are not same or not alike. But when I was working with an NGO, that was like almost a year back, they basically worked with public sector university students in capacity building. And I feel that I had more room to make those sessions more inclusive, because you had students coming from all different walks of lives, majoring in different degrees, and then coming from different socioeconomic status, coming from different religious background, coming from different degrees of being religious. So I think creating the general norm that you have to respect the differences doesn't make them lesser human. Establishing that culture is very important, and then continuously setting the tone and the example in your classrooms, in your training sessions, where they can clearly see that as a facilitator or as a teacher or as a mentor, you are not going to let go of any incident where someone has been disrespected only based on the fact they belong to a certain community or they come from a certain socioeconomic status. That kind of sets the tone, at least for me. I haven't really had an experience where if I was constantly reinforcing this ethos of respect for everyone, dignity for everyone, any student or any trainee ever reached that. So perhaps have been just lucky. But I agree that even like, especially in societies like ours in Pakistan, it's very important for the young okay to differ, it's okay to have opinions that do not align with your ideologies. Like I said, that doesn't make you lesser human, only more interesting perhaps.
Very interesting, Madiha. I think we're it's been such a fantastic, sparking, and also meandering discussion, which I think has touched upon so many interesting topics, from culture to very, very specific strategies, the importance of empowerment, the importance of rewarding, the importance of differentiation, and differentiation not just by abilities but also by interests and stimuli. It's been a really wonderful discussion. I think we're coming to a close, so I also want to make sure that we respect our time as well. I think that one thing that has struck me over and over again was something, Don, that you said, that teaching is deeply a social experience. It's a social setting. You are essentially dealing with 20, 30 individuals with their own kind of emotional, set of feelings, emotional baggage, sometimes experiences, their days, and you're trying to do something positive. You're trying to add something meaningful to their lives in that 30-minute, 50-minute, hour-long lesson. And it's about realizing that this comes with a number of challenges. Some of those are within your control, some of them are not. And it's about how do you make sure that for as many of those students, and the most effective way you can make it a meaningful experience. There have been some amazing strategies discussed, so I really appreciate all of your insights and decades of experience that you've shared with us today. To wrap up, I also, of course, want to share with our listeners and also our potentially future viewers who will come onto this recording. We've been really fortunate to see ZNotes grow for our teacher community. We now have a Discord, a WhatsApp community where teachers are engaging and sharing insights. So you're very, very welcome to join that. Let me share that QR code right here. The ZNotes platform also now has a dedicated teaching portal a presentation mode. It has various other kind of tools and technologies that is making teaching easier. In fact, recently we launched in partnership with AI Edify a number of AI-powered tools, including rubric generators, lesson planners, that are actually anchored on our validated, reviewed content. So would love for some of you to try this out, benefit from these resources that are available, and make your teaching in your classrooms more engaging. Thank you again, Dom, Madiha, and Farheen. It's been such a wonderful discussion, and really appreciate your time and insights today.
Thank you. Thank you, Zubair. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Zubair. Pleasure meeting you, Dom and Farheen. And it was a pleasure being here. Have a nice evening, wherever you are.
Likewise, it was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for the wonderful conversation, guys.
Thank you, everyone. Please feel free to scan the QR code to those who are watching, join our WhatsApp community, and also complete the feedback form. Really appreciate that. Thank you, and have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Bye-bye.